The first writers in residence came to the James Merrill House 25 years ago, shortly after James Merrill's death in 1995. Since then, over 80 writers have visited, staying in his home, a National Historic Landmark, to work on projects of their own. Thanks to Merrill's generosity, the house now belongs to the Stonington Village Improvement Association and is an ongoing inspiration for writers and poets from around the world. For more information, visit our website, jamesmerrillhouse.org. Thank you. So, hi.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Bergen. It is lovely to see the James Merrill hidden study of 107 behind you. It's very nostalgic.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks so much. So this is my new book. It's called The Math Campers.
My own novel. It's called These Women.
It looks like this.
Well, the first thing I'll say is all the dreams are actual dreams. There's nothing worse than a fabricated dream. You can always tell.
I normally don't write in first person because of the fact that as soon as you have a narrator, you tend to have somebody listening, or there's an implied audience.
I just got to soak up in the atmosphere in that house. You just feel like a writer, and you feel like you're part of this tradition and a community, and it feels like the work is important.
Magical things happen when you're looking at Merrill's books.
Well, it was a really, really transformative residency for me. It might sound like a bit of an overstatement, but it really wasn't.
Merrill's really distinct imagination was present in every detail.
Thanks, Brendan. Bye. Enjoy Stonington on my behalf.
Hello, everybody. This is Willard Spiegelman. I'm a member of the James Merrill House Committee. I'm speaking to you from the top floor of 107 Water Street. This is the house that James Merrill bequeathed to the village, and we have been in the process of taking a writer's home and making it, as you've seen, into a home for writers. My happy duty today is simply to introduce you to three people who are going to talk about the recently published book, A Whole World, Selected Letters of James Merrill. And I'd like to dedicate this to the memory of our beloved friend Sandy McClatchy, who died exactly 3 years ago today. He was, of course, as many of you know, a distinguished poet. He wrote opera, libretti. He was an essayist. He was a distinguished editor. He was a man of letters. He was a great cook. He did everything. He was a beloved teacher. And he was also one of Merrill's literary executors. I like to think that if Merrill was right in thinking that there is, or saying that there is a celestial or heavenly bureaucracy that is overseeing the events and the choices of us down below, that Sandy is there, maybe if not pulling the strings himself, at least whispering into the ears of the people who do pull the strings. Our three guests tonight are Deborah Garrison, distinguished poet and senior editor at Alfred Knopf, who shepherded this project to its completion, and then the two editors of the project, Langdon Hammer, professor of English at Yale and the author of the magisterial biography, James Merrill, Life and Art, and Stephen Yenser, professor at UCLA, poet, critic, Merrill's other literary executor. And for those of you who have been intimidated by or too shy to approach Merrill's Changing Light at Sandover, his great epic, which some people think is a strange thing, other people think it is a masterpiece, Stephen has given us recently an annotated version of the first part of that, the most approachable part of that three-part series, the Book of Ephraim. And he would be a wonderful guide to those of you who have been too fearful to pick it up. You might say that he would be the Virgil to the Dante of James Merrill. One piece of housekeeping. If you'd like to pose a question to the panel, please feel free to post it in the live chat function, which should be on the right of your screen. If you would prefer not to see the comment section, some people don't like that on the screen, just try switching to full screen mode. And with that, I turn you over to Deb Garrison in New Jersey, Lanny Hammer sitting one floor beneath me at 107 Water Street, and Stephen Yenser, who's beaming in from the West Coast. Take it away, Deb.
Thank you, Willard. That was beautiful. And I've been thinking of Sandy all day. And it was really one of my great pleasures. My tour of the Merrill house was with Sandy there in Stonington. And I'll never forget that day. So it's nice that Lanny and Willard are there today. I'm sorry that we all can't be there together. But it's like next year in Jerusalem, next year in Stonington, I hope. And I'm delighted to just welcome everyone to this conversation. And I'm going to jump right in. I just want to show this absolutely, wait, let me see if I can do it. Absolutely gorgeous volume with Jimmy James. He called Jamie, known by many names, our beloved JM, in a photograph on the, and this was designed by Chip Kidd, Sandy's husband. Beautiful jacket. Thank you, Chip. So let's just jump right into these letters. And I'll start by asking Lanny and Stephen, let's just talk about letters as a way of approaching the life of any writer, but especially James Merrill. When we're reading the letters, in a way, it's a selection that takes us through an arc of the life and the people that he was close to, and lovers, friends, fellow poets, all kinds of things in his life. So I wanted to ask each of you, Lanny, for you, how is this different when we're reading the letters as opposed to reading, say, your biography? What do letters give us differently than the biography as readers of JM's life? And Stephen, for you, maybe you could address, I'll let Lanny go first, but could you address really the poetry and the letters together? How, what do we get from, from the letters differently from the poetry, which of course is also about Merrill's life? So Lanny, why don't you go first with the biography versus letters, or together with letters?
Well, the person whose biography I wrote is the person who wrote the letters.
Yeah.
I would be interested to know what Deb thinks about this, as somebody who's read both books and not just shepherded, but in many ways sustained and carried these books to print and to the public. When I read these letters, that was the primary material I made that book out of, along with Merrill's notebooks. His notebooks and his letters are interestingly different. I think of his notebooks as this area that he used to catch things in which he began to write poems, in which he remembered something funny from dinner last night, from a trip to a museum. In his letters, he is introspective in a way that perhaps other people are in their journals. And introspective, therefore, also necessarily in this dialogic way. That is, he's thinking about himself and his life in conversation with people.
Yeah. But do you feel in the letters he is more than the notebooks? He's kind of trying out the narratives of his life and sort of shaping them in a way, or are the notebooks equally a shaping mechanism? The letters are so polished in a way, aren't they?
Absolutely, and yet they weren't. He just wrote them.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, well, that's interesting. Now, Stephen, jump in with me about the poems and the letters together. as a way of reading through life.
Okay, thank you. Let me say first that it's a beautiful book. I think it exceeded even Lanny's expectations and mine. I got a note the other day from a British publisher, Phil Hoy, who is editor-in-chief of and founder of Waywiser Press, and he had just seen the book, and he wrote. He said that he thought it was mouth-wateringly good to have in his hands. He said it's another of those wonderful Knopf productions that are a delight to look at and to hold in one's hands. And that's from another publisher about this publication. I think it's true, and we're so grateful to Deb Garrison for holding all these forces together for such a long time. James was a wonderful talker, a wonderful conversationalist. I didn't understand how he could be so good. And so I asked him once, I said, since his conversational style was so distinctive and riveting, who might his models have been in addressing people? And, I expected him to say maybe, a character in Henry James, or E.F. Benson, or maybe Rosa Macaulay, but he answered instantly. And he said, that would be Tony and Maria.
Mm-hmm.
And Tony and Maria are friends in Athens. Tony was an Alexandrian Athenian, but he came from Alexandria. Maria Marin Mitsotakis was an aristocratic Athenian. And both of them were citizens of the world. They were both polyglot. They both had many frames of reference that they went to all the time and shuffled like cards. And that was the way, sure enough, James was. He was very quick with a quip and very good with an anecdote, and he could do it in several languages. But I bring that up, his conversational style, because it is very much the style of the letters, I think. The letters are, as Lanny was saying, I think it's someplace in between the very rough, fascinating desk and the polished poems. But the letters, too, are highly polished, as Lanny also said and Deb said. And he wrote them very quickly. It's amazing that he could write so quickly and so well. The thing is, I think that James loved to write.
That helps.
He loved to write letters, but that was an offshoot of his just loving to write. And when he sat down to write a letter, especially to a friend, he was right in his element. He couldn't wait to get the pen to the paper or get his fingers on the keyboard and tell a story, or say, as Lanny was saying, the remarks and jeu de mots from the previous night and so on. It was just a great joy to him to immerse himself in the words. And you can see it time and again at the beginning of his letters, where suddenly something will catch right away in the first sentence, the second sentence, and he's off on a metaphor or a pun has sparked him, and he's having fun. And he knows that he's entertaining his readers, and he loved to entertain people like that.
And himself.
I'm sorry, I'm going on too long. But you see
No.
In the poems. The poems, oddly enough, though, sometimes, often, in fact, more often than any other poet that I know, James will begin with lines that tell us that he's not feeling well, that he's ill, that he's cold, especially cold. The coldness stands in for some kind of malaise or other.
Mm-hmm.
And so the poems start with an illness. I mean, the 1002nd Night is maybe the most famous example of this, where he has Bell's palsy and half of his face is paralyzed. And the whole poem then develops out of that image. But there are many other poems, like Mornings in a New House, which gives us the title of the book, The Fire Screen. And he's cold at the beginning. It's cold again and again, but he warms up. And by the time you get to the end of the poem, he's warm. And the poem is accepting of things that it previously was afraid of or in agony about. And that's one reason why I think of him, I think he thought of himself as a kind of comic poet in the very broadest sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because things end well for him. They end well in the letters. They end well in the poems. Things are somehow right again. And he's got them to be right by writing them, I think.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry, I've gone off into
No, but that's another. So, Lanny, what about this side of him that is that kind of cheerful correspondent?
Mm.
You know, is this partly to do with what he comes from? And there's a kind of almost good breeding where you don't complain too much, or your complaints are kind of light and charming. I mean, the reading the letters, I think a lot about this sort of interesting thing in Merrill about both. There's this kind of, I guess the question is, where's the balance between artifice and the kind of charm and cheerfulness, and then the honesty? I mean, the brutal honesty, because I somehow never feel with him when I'm reading him, I don't feel, oh, well, it's this kind of, I mean, because it is charming and cheerful. And as Stephen says, he always kind of ends up turning to that light note or resolving it with the warmth. But I never feel, oh, well, it's kind of put on and I don't believe him. There's something for him that was honest about that transformation, I think. But I don't know. I wanted to ask about artifice and honesty, you know, and how that, because there are moments that are, as I say, brutally honest, and you feel that he's being truthful, even though you feel he's being so artful. So what a creature. I mean, how does he do this?
What a great question. As you know, as Stephen is talking, as you are, Deb, I'm thinking about a letter that Merrill writes to David McIntosh in 1986. His friend David Callstone has been diagnosed with AIDS and is declining, and Merrill himself is ill, and he suspects he also may be infected. And at the head of the letter, unusually, he writes in capital letters, "A gloomy letter by and large."
Yes.
Because, you know, he resists this, and he doesn't want to impose sadness or distress on his reader. And yes, nonetheless, there is this drive towards honesty and to somehow convert his experience into something that has warmth, to use your figure, Stephen, that he returns to over and over again. And he makes this, as you put it, Deb, transformation in the course of many letters, I think, through writing. And, you know, you could say that over and over again, one of the major motives of the letters is to somehow rise to life and give it its due, meet it, and find out what is funny, instructive, maybe useful, and to do so through writing, through words. So you can see Merrill doing this over and over again in his letters. It's what makes each letter live.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to emphasize, thinking about what I wanted to say about his letters, is what a strong sense of his presence one has.
Yeah.
At every point in the letters. You don't feel. Oh, of course, there's all sorts of role playing and poses and play and so on, and yet you feel as though he's there in those letters, which is remarkable, as Stephen was saying, and and is related to, you know, what I would want to describe as the specific genre of the letter, which none of us write anymore, do we? I mean,
Not that way.
not that way. The sense that I'm going to sit down for an hour and talk to you, Deb or Stephen, this afternoon on the typewriter. And I'm giving myself over to that. And it's not going to be just about Knopf business or Merrill business. It's going to be about my life and what is going on. And I'm going to share it with you.
Well, and you know, he had so many good friends. You can do that with your very good friends. Long time ago, somebody asked me about my relationship with James Merrill, and I said, well, you know, actually, he was my best friend for 25 years, and it was true. But then I realized, of course, that he had many best friends. The world, the literary world, well, whatever. His world was full of people who were his best friends. And when you are that way with people, you can be honest. And when I was thinking about what Deb might ask today and what we might say, and I was thinking about the features of the letter, the first word I wrote down was honesty.
Interesting.
You could count on him to be honest. And so you be careful what you ask for.
Well, yeah, I mean, the gift for friendship, that's another thing we were at some point talking about. And you brought it up here, Stephen. I mean, we all know people for whom a number of people would say they're he's my best friend, because that person has such a gift for friendship that they make every other person, that it doesn't matter that they have 10 of them, each one of them, they can function at that level. So Stephen, you're the one of us here who really had you were in the book as one of the correspondents. Is it okay if I ask you, tell us about being that, receiving that friendship? The letters to you are wonderful. What was it like was a lot of the friendship how much of it was in the letters, and did it develop? Because as Lanny was saying, at this point, people, even email is kind of outdated. We're dinosaurs if we're using email so much, but we are, a lot of us still do in the literary world. But, we might have one line at the end that says, I hope you're well and doing okay, or, some little personal detail at the end. But, emails we're kind of transacting business mostly. And then we might give a little personal nod. But, this kind of attention through letters, and he has so many different tones because of the many different correspondents that he speaks with. Tell us about your relationship in letters and what that felt like, and sort of the arc of it a little bit for you in your life, if you don't mind.
Well, I don't mind at all. For a long time, my correspondence with James was the center of my life. And we didn't live in the same town, except rarely. I lived in Athens for a year. My wife and I lived there, and James and David found us a place to live there. And so I lived around the corner from him for a year. But that's the only time that we lived in the same place. We would see each other. When he went abroad, maybe I could run into him in Amsterdam or in France or someplace. And so that happened. But at first, excuse me, the relationship was entirely by correspondence. And then I visited him, and he would come west to read at UCLA or someplace else, and we'd get to know each other, and that was always great. But a substantial part of the relationship was by letter. And I waited for them. I looked forward to them. And when I would see his handwriting on the envelope, that made my day. Because his letters are so lively and funny and concerned, and right there immediately, he's with you, as Lanny was saying. The presence is very, very strong.
Yeah.
And all these tones that you were talking about, I mean, they're so entertaining, the letters, partly because there are so many tones. And he can go from the louche to the chic, to the simply friendly in a flash. But that is the thing about James Merrill. He was not one person. I mean, he was several people all in there. I think if he had a tutelary deity, it would have to be Mercury, Hermes. He's all about changing into different forms, and he loved having access to those different forms, and he loved putting them together. He says in the last letter in the book that he thinks Alexandria might be his home city, though he never spent any time there, because of the cultures, the mixogamous culture. That there is there. And that was James. He had these many, many facets. And it's hard for me to talk about him without getting off into the weeds, as I have just done. But I think hermetic is
well, okay, but just a quick follow-up, and then I'll go back to the many James Merrills. But Stephen, were there times, there are times in this book, and maybe you can reflect for a moment, are there times where a letter from him, I mean, where he isn't afraid to really actually give you life advice in a letter? He's sort of like momentous moments in your life and decisions that you're making. It's not just, again, the charm and the funny and weren't there moments where he kind of said, did you feel like sometimes letters kind of, he was pointing you toward his advice in terms of your life path at times?
Oh, absolutely. And that was kind of scary, because, I thought so much of him. And so it could be difficult. Now, he never, or almost never, volunteered advice without some kind of request for it.
So you would ask him, you would share something about your life, and he would take that as an invitation to then weigh in.
Yes, though he sometimes volunteered information when he thought that I was straying from the path, whatever the path of the moment was. Yeah. Kimon Fryer asked him to detail his responses to a translation that Kimon had done. And James just took the book apart. The book was dedicated to James. But James nonetheless took him too severely to task. And Kimon must have known in the beginning that James would do this, or maybe he didn't, but James did. I think he would have done the same for me had I behaved in just the way Kimon did. But he had advice on when a relationship shouldn't be broken, on how much I was drinking, on how much I was smoking. Yeah, you tell me.
Well, and then Lanny, let's talk for a minute about the different James, Jamie, Jay, Jimmy, JM. Willard brought this up when we were chatting beforehand. Those, I don't know. Can you reflect a little bit on some of the different people he was? Like, I don't know, you can pick two different, the Jimmy that he was to his mother, and then what about, the Jamie, or maybe I'm getting it wrong, to his friend Claude Fredericks, or talk to us a little bit about that as his biographer. What were those different relationships and how he kind of positions himself?
Yeah, I will. First, I wanted to just respond to what Stephen is talking about. One of the things that I find interesting about his advice giving, and there's a lot of advice giving in these letters.
Yeah.
In the correspondence with Robin McGowan, with Stephen, with Judy Moffat, with many friends, not all of them younger, but many of them, particularly as he grows older. I referred earlier to this sense of the letters as this vehicle of introspection that is dialogic. And, the thing is, when he's giving Stephen a hard time about, a marriage breaking up, he's, that's his occasion to talk about himself and to think about what's involved. And it's all live and kind of happening for him, too.
Yeah.
I think that's.
Well, it had happened to him. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Multiple JMs. Well, there's multiple correspondence. I love the many signatures, right? There's, Jimmy, as you can see, to Stephen, he was James. There are letters that he signs JM. I have two letters. One is signed James M. And it's the only letter that I've ever seen that he signed that way. Jamie was a nickname that Alice B. Toklas gave to him, and Claude Fredericks picked it up, and then David Jackson in various ways. He signs, in fact, a postcard to Stephen. I'm not going to get the name right. It's Lil Jammer something. It's an anagram for James Merrill. He writes a letter to Lawrence Scott, which is, a kind of small, offensive camp masterpiece, signed Marianne Moore. He loved to play with correspondence as a form, and Stephen talked about Merrill as a person with not multiple identities but multiple facets, let's say.
Yeah.
And he liked to pun on the idea of the gem, which is almost an anagram for JM, right?
Yes.
As having multiple cuts and refracted lights, and in fact, his I think correspondence allowed him to have that multiplicity.
Yeah.
Even while I think as you read that book, that the same person wrote all these letters. Which is also
well, that's the thing I marvel at again and again with him is again the fact that he can do all of this and that you feel you're still in every case you feel that you're still in connection with the essential person.
Mm-hmm.
There's something how he manages to be true to himself with all of these different, because you can feel him very much in different tones for different people. I wanted to ask you, Lanny, a little bit more about the relationship with his mother, which fascinates me, and I feel remind our listeners of the story of because it's to do with letters, isn't it? Of the mother. Tell the story of his young, what went on between him and his mother around letters. And then we see the arc. Tell us a little bit about the arc of their life in the letters, their life together.
Yeah. Actually, if I had a critique of our book, one thing I would say is that we, do not represent his correspondence with his mother very broadly. There are just really a few letters. But as we say in the introduction, in fact, there's, you could write, you could produce a book that was quite as large as ours that were only his letters to his mother.
Right.
The letter that the issue that you're referring to, Deb, is very important. Now I've forgotten the year. Let me say 1951, 1952. While Merrill was in Rome, his mother entered his New York apartment, found his correspondence with Freddie Buechner, Keeman Fryer, and other people, Claude Fredericks, and took those letters and destroyed them. as she explained her action to him, she was saving him from the risk of blackmail that was in play due to his homosexuality and the intimacy of these correspondences. These were, this was a wounding event. And Merrill later asked his friends to donate their letters to Washington University in St. Louis. And he made a point of taking special care with his correspondences with certain people, David McIntosh, Shadow Muflazelis, and certain other people. And I think we need to think about his curating of his letters as a response to that kind of censorship that his mother had imposed on him early in his life. I think that Merrill wanted to make sure that there was an archive of this correspondence that was with very few, available with very few restrictions, that he did not edit, that he did not curate for the public, but that would be available. And I think that some of what we've been describing as his readiness and kind of ability to be present in his letters reflects a kind of, urgency to put himself forward in a whole and honest way in relation to his intimate friends, and to put that self-expression on record.
Right. And Stephen, can you say more about that? Just even in terms of, to me also, this is so poignant about this, the world of gay life in that time. And were you who knew him and corresponding with him acutely aware of the kind of intimacy that you were receiving? I mean, because as we know, there's the famous comment that he made, and Lanny, correct me or Stephen, if I get it wrong, but about that he lived in a time where eventually, he didn't have to come out of the closet because the closet dissolved around him, and he lived through that stonewall into the next phase of gay life in America and so on. But truly, in any case, it was a very, very different time from the time we live in now. And I guess even being just, slightly younger and having missed, I met James Merrill at the very end of his life. I kind of the ships just passed. So, I had a little bit of moment with him in the world, but as I became an adult was sort of the end of his time in the literary world. So I'm curious how it felt and how important it was for him to be able to be frank in these letters about his partnership with David Jackson, his other relationships. And was this stuff, did it feel like it was very much private at the time? Were you aware of it needing to be private, or what was that balance with the honesty, but also the fact that there would be people out there who, as his mother feared, would make something problematic for him with his sexuality?
You used the word stonewall in a different sense. I was noticing the other day that word stonewall, which means so much in a gay culture, does not come up in the letters.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could read the letters and feel that he wears it all so easily when he talks about the good boys and the troublesome boys and the relationships. But how easy was that for him, or was it not?
I think it was easy. He was right about the closet just dissolving, and he was one of the ones who made it dissolve. he was always just perfectly open about it. I mean, I don't recall ever having a conversation with him about this subject. He he knew that of course that I knew that he was gay. We just never talked about it, but all of the, or that's all we talked. I mean, it was always there. It was always a part of his life. So I've kind of lost my track here. Let me go back to the honesty. Now, I think that's a part of the answer to your question. He was always utterly honest and objective. He wanted his letters preserved, partly, I think, because he knew that something about what he would be one day. He knew something about his position as a writer in the world very early on. He wanted them preserved not just to protect them from people, from forces like his mother, but because he knew that they were very good. He was. And he wanted people to know that there were people other than his mother who loved him and whom he loved back. He was so objective about himself that he felt he could be open to other people, I think. I mean, one thing that he told me and Sandy very early on was that he wanted his biographer to be somebody who was not gay and who was not a close friend of his. He did not want somebody to write about him who would have any axe to grind in any direction. And of course, Lanny was the ideal person. He knew James a little bit, but he didn't know him intimately. He's an excellent critic and writer, and with all kinds of interests in common, and an honest man. So, but that was how much he wanted to see himself squarely.
Lanny, what do you think about this from going through the process of the biography and discovering what you discovered in the letters about his relationships? And sometimes I found it so poignant the way that he both lived, as Stephen says, he just didn't apologize and lived the way he lived, in various stages of the culture. He hewed to his true self, but there were moments that felt so poignant about not I don't know, maybe the culture that he was part of and the limitations of it in some ways that are less true now. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't talk about it too much, but I wonder if you feel that in him in the way that he lived. Do you feel there were limitations, or did he just do what he wanted and damn the rest?
We read the book of letters, and what he will say and how he will say things varies a great deal in terms of who he's writing to. Some of my favorite correspondences are with Daryl Hine, Tony Perigori, sometimes David Calstone, that are, kind of outrageous camp documents, terribly funny. They are, it's not that they're necessarily saturated with sexual anecdote, although they are, but it's a kind of release of a kind of voice and personality that one finds in those letters. That is kind of exhilarating and fun and funny, and that taps a kind of deep part of him. I think that as you read these letters over the decades, he is more of a whole person in more of his letters, if we can put it that way. And that's striking. I think you referred earlier to his remark in his memoir, A Different Person, where he talks about his relation to gay liberation being like Sarah Bernhardt descending a staircase. The divine Sarah did not actually walk down the staircase, but the staircase revolved around her. This is how he, describes what's happening in the world around him, and how some kind of identity that he always had suddenly became an out identity. But that way of describing it characteristically eliminates a lot of the struggle or friction and difficulty. And I think that's an essential part of his life. I think it's an essential part of his poetry. I think one of the things that's kind of powerful about the letters is that you realize that the James Merrill that would become a famous writer, that is the James Merrill of the late 70s and 80s, who is every bit a gay writer, is already that person in his letters in certain contexts early in his life. And in that sense, there's a great deal of continuity. However, I think that his own ways of accounting for that minimize the difficulty and challenge, which is really legible there in his poetry, where in some sense making peace with, for example, his mother.
Yes.
But in general, a kind of sense of claiming a gay identity in public is an ongoing project in the poetry.
Yeah. Stephen, sorry, you go ahead. I won't even jump in. You go.
Well, this is just a PS. It just struck me that one of the letters he wrote early on to Louise Fitzhugh, the author of the famous children's books about Harriet, with whom he had a sexual relationship, wasn't one of the few women. But they were good friends forever thereafter, since he never left anything behind. And he was telling her about David Jackson's teaching at Conn College and how David had taken to it with larger classes than he expected. And James says to Louise, he says, and he uses the word homosexual in class. Now, this is in the 1960s.
Wow.
And he's surprised that David does it with such ease. And he goes ahead to say that in my case, he had also done some teaching at this point at Bard. He said it always just reduced me to stammers.
Interesting.
He couldn't say homosexual in front of a class. Can you imagine a time like that?
Well, that's what I'm really interested in, how he did all this and then manages to write an epic about a gay couple. I mean, and about their domestic life that, is a monumental work about a pair of men.
And it's Tom Gunn said it was the best, that Sandover was the best representation of a married gay life that he knew. And, so at some point we may say, what's the big deal here? It's a poem about two people who are married.
Right. But when you think about that fascinates me as someone who was really just a kid at that time. I want to just jump in. I'm noticing before we wind up a couple little things, and I'm seeing a little bit in the comments that people are delighted to hear that Merrill was friendly with Louise Fitzhugh, who wrote Harriet the Spy. Remind me how did he, Lanny? Can you remind me how he met Louise Fitzhugh, or where that came from and their connection?
Louise Fitzhugh took a poetry writing directed reading with James Merrill, and I think somewhere in the course of that year at Bard, they one or the other seemed to stoke a little romance, and Merrill, in some excitement, seems to write to Freddie Buechner
Yeah.
significantly to to announce that he's actually attracted to a woman. But Louise ditched him pretty quickly for the gym teacher. He says, a woman, and they each righted themselves and remained friends for the next 25 years or so.
It's a wonderful. It's not a long correspondence in the book, but the bits we get are wonderful. I just want to, since I do want to pick up a couple more wonderful questions from the chat here. So Boris Draliak asks, could you say a bit more about the letters in terms of literary content? Were you surprised by any of his critical judgments in that superb reading list for Torrin Blair, for instance? Stephen, tell us about his reading list for Torrin Blair. And I mean, I guess I just constantly feel like Merrill is so well read. When I was reading the letters, I was keeping notes in my phone of books. At one point I said to myself, I should do a book club for myself of reading all the books that Merrill just mentions casually in the letters. He seems so well read. But Stephen, were you surprised by any of the kind of literary content? It's all just very off the cuff in a way, isn't it?
But by then I wasn't surprised. I knew that it would be a large list. I mean, James loved to do this. He was really a kind of born tutor. He was not a born teacher. He didn't enjoy teaching. He loathed teaching, in fact. But he liked talking to individuals about what they should do, what they should read, what they should listen to in music, what they should go look at in art if they wanted to be cultivated and cultured. He had one friend who steadfastly refused to be that. He said, she just adamantly opposed being cultured, much to his dismay. But so I wasn't surprised. It is daunting. It does feature the metaphysical poets. It also features Alexander Pope, who is not somebody in our day that people return to very much, so we always will again. So it's a vital list. I recommend it to anybody.
You could build a course around his peaks, right? And then a question from Willard Spiegelman: how much more might we know if we, the readers, could see both sides of the correspondence? Might we ever read the letters that J.M. received from his friends and lovers? Most of them would not be as well written, but they might be informative. How much, Lanny, did you see a lot of the other side of these correspondences when you were working on the biography, or was it more that you saw Merrill's side? What do we know about the other side?
Yeah, one could read both. I want to comment on my location. I'm speaking to you in the dining room in 107 Water Street, and this is a magical space. It's just been reappointed too, so the color is really fresh. The thing that's striking me is that these chairs, for instance, here's one. Whoops, it's hard to.
There you go.
There you go.
You could find these in any antique store in, the East Coast, and yet James Merrill has painted them with ochre and purple and pink, and it is a remarkable space. And what am I saying? I'm saying that he understood how to enhance, enlarge, and enchant his environment, including those around him and his correspondences. I think that one can. Merrill made everything he touched with a kind of Midas way, not turn to gold, but turn to some kind of rainbow, let's say, some kind of brilliance of color. And I think that when one reads most of his correspondences, one is reading his enlargement and enchantment, and one is encountering the other side of that correspondence as what he was enlivening.
Okay, one more question, and then I'm going to make you each tell me your favorite letter. Christopher Wilson asks, did you see a shift in tone in JM's letters after his HIV diagnosis? Was he able to still maintain? You know what? Then I can't see the rest of what it ends at that. But did we see a shift? Either one of you? What, Stephen? Did you feel there's a shift after the diagnosis in the letters?
No.
Interesting.
Looking back now, I can see things, and I did not know until later than Sandy McClatchy knew.
Right.
That he
was one of his confidants. Yeah.
And I could not tell from his letters to me that he was ill.
And Lanny, what about you? When you read them now, do you see that shift?
I can't read the letters without reading his diagnosis into them.
Yeah.
And therefore, even when they maintain their manners, that has a different meaning in the context of his situation.
Yeah. Okay, so with just a few moments here to go, Stephen, what is your favorite letter? Maybe you get two. Favorite letter to you and favorite letter to someone, and then Lanny, you.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm just gonna quote. Okay.
Do it.
I'm going to quote from two letters. One is very early, to Bill Burford, to William Burford, and James is thinking about those two as writers, and thinking about what might happen to them. And James says, it is not inconceivable that one day we shall find in ourselves that all the contradictions and desires and angers have, through their quarreling, created a way of life, a way of thought, an element as lucid, revealing as we had always imagined existing outside ourselves. We shall have created our own commonplace. That's a strange use of the word commonplace, I think. But
marvelous.
But I love the note. Now the other one I just lost. Lanny, do you have your letter, and then maybe we can come back?
Well, it's really hard to improve on the first letter.
Yes, it is. I agree.
Which is Dear Santa Claus, and that is Santa Claus with an E on the end of Claus. Please bring me a flashlight.
Yes.
Jimmy Merrill.
It's remarkable.
All right, I found my other letter. Can I read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. I mustn't tell you how happy I have been. It might imply too much about whatever I had been before. Everything I could possibly want seems to be here within me. You are within me, shaking your head, skeptical, or at least bemused. This is to me, by the way, as well. Poems seem to hang within reach, slowly ripening. No more nervous shaking down of sour green apples. They'll wait and grow delicious. If something else gets felt, a sadness, a solitude, it's more like the sweat on a piece of chilled sweet fruit. It's a feeling I've known before, only from relatively few minutes, perhaps an hour's worth in any given year, of absolute absorption in the work. Or from those other times, familiar surely to my best readers, when the wheel, so to speak, is taken. It's love I'm in now, I suppose, but love that for once doesn't depend on another person, that fallible God of Borges. It's not really love for myself even, except as the vehicle for the angelic chauffeur. And so this is when the commonplace, he has his commonplace. You know, he had discovered that commonplace that 25, 27 years before he talked about to Burford. And here he's really in the middle of a good, fertile period, and he's just kind of in love.
Well, and that's a great, it's 6:00. This has been great talking to both of you. I think love is a great note to end on, and interesting that we didn't mention it until now, because I think for people who haven't yet read the letters, boy, oh boy, is it a subject. It's one of his great subjects, of course. And again, the honesty is, you know, it's worth the tour of his writings about love that are two different people written from a place of love, but also about love. It's a great subject in this book. There's so much more. Thank you for everybody in the comments. Wonderful comments. Just make sure that, oh yes, Cynthia Elliott says, Lanny, do you want to mention that the table you're sitting at is the one at which JM and DJ sat with the Ouija board? Of course, you're at the table. We see the bat wallpaper in the background. Again, may we all meet there. This has been great. And I think Willard, will you come back on and tell us what the next event is? And thank you, Stephen Yenser and Langdon Hammer. Thank you, Merrill House. And thank you, wonderful readers and friends in the comments, for being with us today. Hi, Willard.
I'm there? Yes, I'm there. The time has passed in a flash. I think I'm speaking for everybody here when I say I wish this could go on longer. It's like the best cocktail party one could imagine. Fortunately for us, it will go on longer, because this series is like Caesar's Gall. It comes in 3 parts. Or you might say it's like the Divine Comedy. Or you might say it's like The Changing Light at Sandover. So on Friday, April 23rd, beaming in from St. Louis, from Washington University in St. Louis, there's going to be a conversation with Stephen and Lanny and others, in conversation led by Joel Miner of the Wash U Library there. And that's, of course, where the Merrill papers, most of them, now exist. And you can register in advance via the wustl.edu/events website, or check back on the jamesmerrillhouse.org website to figure out how to get there. And then on Friday, May 7th, from 5 to 6, just like tonight, I will be back here at 107 Water Street with Lanny and Stephen beaming in from wherever they choose to be. And they are going to do a reading from the letters and various reminiscences of James Merrill, the man and the poet. And I would urge everybody who is interested to rush right out and buy a copy of this marvelous book. Do not buy it from the giant you-know-whom, but go to your local bookstore, please. Thanks very much. See you next time.
The first writers and residents came to the James Merrill House 25 years ago, shortly after James Merrill's death in 1995. Since then, over 80 writers have visited, staying in his home, a National Historic Landmark, to work on projects of their own. Thanks to Merrill's generosity, the house now belongs to the Stonington Village Improvement Association and is an ongoing inspiration for writers and poets from around the world. For more information, visit our website, jamesmerrillhouse.org. Thank you. So, hi.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Bergen. It is lovely to see the James Merrill hidden study of 107 behind you. It's very nostalgic.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks so much. So this is my new book. It's called The Math Campers.
My own novel. It's called These Women.
It looks like this.
Well, the first thing I'll say is all the dreams are actual dreams. There's nothing worse than a fabricated dream. You can always tell.
I normally don't write in first person because of the fact that as soon as you have a narrator, you tend to have somebody listening, or there's an implied audience.
I just got to soak up in the atmosphere in that house. You just feel like a writer, and you feel like you're part of this tradition and a community, and it feels like the work is important.
Magical things happen when you're looking at Merrill's books.
Well, it was a really, really transformative residency for me. It might sound like a bit of an overstatement, but it really wasn't.
Merrill's really distinct imagination was present in every detail.
Thanks, Bye. Enjoy Stonington on my behalf.